Welcome, everyone, whether you are here in person or you are joining us online. I am delighted to welcome everyone for the third and unfortunately last, unless we can talk her into throwing a few more study sessions in this particular series, last session of our wonderful Scholar in Residence. Not quite a weekend. I think that I'm not sure. I look forward actually to hearing your feedback about the experience. I can tell you that I don't know whether I have felt any different, particularly about this studying not being on the weekend, but I know that I've missed food because I realized that usually, right, there's food, there's dinner, and there's lunch.
That's fine. I understood that I'm not, worth investing in. That's totally fine. I'm just saying. Yeah, that's a promise, I guess, but yeah, I'm just saying.
All
He
right.
takes me to Costco, so I can't complain.
Of course. And with that, I am for people who are joining us from home, would you please give me an idea that you can hear us? Yes, excellent. And so with that, and you can see the slide, correct? Yes, very good. All right.
Okay.
And Jesus in the problem.
It is. Okay, so it's nice to see you all and thank you for having me. And it's been, is that good? The volume? Good. Tell me if it's too low or if I still too fast. That's a problem too. So thank you so much for having me here. And this is our third and last meeting. And what I want to do today is talk about Jesus in the Talmud. And usually when people talk about Christianity in the Talmud, that's where they start. That's usually where people start. This is why we didn't start there, because I wanted to expand this. And this is what we did in the first two meetings. We talked about a little bit monastic literature, right? The literature of the monks. Then we talked a little bit about heretic stories and stories about heresy and Christian and rabbinic engagement with Christian views and theology. But now we get to the basic. And the basic is the places where Christianity is explicitly mentioned in the Talmud. If you look very careful at the three talks that I've chosen to give here, they kind of make up a series that make up the entire references to Christianity in the Talmud. We had no mention of Christianity, right? We read a story about a rabbi in a cave, and we talked about it being a center of Jewish culture there later on in the Kabbalah, in the Zohar, right? So it doesn't mention Christianity, and we try to highlight and say, yes, it is. There's something Christian in the background of creating that story, but the story itself did not betray its Christian origin. That's class number two. Number one. Class number two that we did was in between, right? Because there's a heretic mention. So we knew that there was something there, a conversation with an outsider, right? Some kind of a view from outside of rabbinic literature. So that was in the middle one. And this class is dedicated to an explicit mention of Christianity in the name of Jesus. So we kind of like covered in those three lectures, including today, the whole range of Christian references in the Talmud, because there are really three different kinds. Now, when I talk about Christianity in the Talmud, and this is what we talked a little bit, and just to remind you, because I think it was something like 2 weeks since we met last time, 2 weeks? Longer than that? Month? No, it wasn't a month. A month? A month. Oh. Wow. Okay, time flies. Okay, so someone said something in the chat. Michael, can you see this? Louder, please. Oh, Jacqueline, am I loud enough? Yeah, okay. So when we talked about them, just to remind you, we talked about the geographical, right, area in modern day Iran and Iraq. This is where the Talmud is being composed. We talked about where the Jews live, right, in between those rivers, the narrow area of the two rivers. And we talked a little bit about this map that I created, right, when I put over the geographical map, I took the maps of the Christians and put on top the maps of the Jews. And I try to say that we're basically trying to look at, and this is new, we're trying to look at Jewish-Christian interaction in that area, right? Which I suggested to you is something that should be done in research. And we kind of talked about the history of scholarship and how it wasn't done. But when people did look at Christianity, the few that did, what we're going to read today in class was what they looked at. the mentions of Jesus in the Talmud, because there are. Jesus is mentioned in the Talmud in very few places. By the end of today's hour, is that our time frame, right? An hour? An hour and a half. So in the end of today's an hour and a half, you'll be almost expert of all of Jesus' mentions in the Talmud, because there are not a lot of them. But when we talk about Jesus in the Talmud, we have to be very careful what we mean when we say Talmud. Because when the Talmud was printed, when the printing was invented in the 15th century, 16th century, when they started printing the Talmud, the Jesus passages were taken out or changed for a good historical reason. We'll read the passages and you'll know. These are passages, and I have to say that outright, that have a bloody history. They're not nice about Jesus, most of them. And we'll talk about that and what it means. We'll try to be nuanced and complex about it. But they have a bloody history. They caused Jews to die, literally, because when Christians looked at those sources, they knew about them from several reasons during medieval times. Jews were punished for them with their lives. So this is a class that when I'm looking at Jesus in the Talmud, I'm looking for those passages, but I'm not looking for them in the printed version because they were taken out. I'm looking at them from manuscript, and that's what we'll do together, because we're kind of reclaiming them and re-putting them in the Talmud. By the way, today's printed edition, Steinsaltz, for example, and all those, they bring them back in. But the classic Talmud that you have on your shelf, the big volumes, the classic ones don't have those, and we'll see them. Okay. So when we start talking about the Talmud, this is the first passage where we're going. We're going to do a little bit of chronological. They're not all together. They're spread out in the Talmud, but I organize it in a certain order, and this is where we start. So we start in Tractate Shabbat. So Tractate Shabbat deals with the laws of Shabbat. And one of the laws it's dealt with is the question of what consists of writing on Shabbat. You're not supposed to write. Writing is one of the things you're not supposed to do on the Shabbat. And the question is, some forms of writing, so what defines writing that's not supposed to happen on Shabbat is writing that lasts. So for example, if you write on the sand, it's okay. It becomes not okay later on, but originally it's okay. Why? Because it doesn't last, right? The wind will come and blow it, or it's not something that lasts. Well, the question we're dealing with, what happens when you tattoo something on your body? Now, tattooing happens in the ancient world in two phases. The first is like scratches on the back, and then you kind of make the scratching permanent. So the question is about the first stage, when you scratch something on your body. Does this consist of writing? Can you do it on the Sabbath, right? So now they ask, does this consist of writing or not? And then in that context, this is what we find in the Talmud. And let's read this. So he who scratches a mark on his flesh, that's the quote from the Mishnah. It was taught, Rabbi Eliezer said to the sages, but did not Ben Stada bring forth witchcraft from Egypt by means of scratches in the form of charm upon his flesh? He was a fool, answered them, and proof cannot be adduced from fools. A weird passage. So the passage says, Rabbi Eliezer comes along and he says, you know what? You say this doesn't consist of writing and it doesn't, count. But I have a good example of someone who did write something on his flesh and it counted. And that guy was named Ben Stada. Now, the response of the rabbis is a very fierce one. We don't trust that guy. He's a fool, and we don't learn anything from what fools do. What is this about? This is actually a quote from the Tosefta, a little bit with the changes. And then the Talmud will go on to explain why is this such a reaction. And notice we're switching now to manuscript editions. Right, so this is where we go with manuscript edition. And this is what the manuscript edition does. Was he the son of Stada or the son of Pandira? Wait. You call him son of Stada and he brought forth witchcraft? By the way, let's stop and talk a little bit about witchcraft. What does witchcraft means? That's not a rhetorical question. It's an actual question. What does witchcraft mean? What would you do when you do witchcraft? Spells. What happens when you cast a spell? Okay, so why do you need a spell if you want to do something bad to someone? What makes it a witchcraft? So you need that to make that happen, the bad thing happen, right? So basically what you're doing is supernatural, right? You're creating something supernatural. What's another word for creating something out of the natural instead of witchcraft? Let's say splitting magic. That's good. That's a good one. That's basically another word for witchcraft. But let's rethink about that for a second. Splitting the sea into two, supernatural, right? Is that witchcraft? What's the word we usually use? Miracle. Okay, so that was my bottom line. The ability to do things that are supernatural are either magic or witchcraft or miracle. What's the difference between the two? Good. How do you determine which is and which isn't? Yeah, exactly. So witchcraft will always be the other people doing it, and miracle is ours. That's basically it. It could be the same thing and it will be the same, right? Exactly it. And that's what it is. So if we look at it this way, we know that this guy performed witchcraft, meaning whoever this Ben Stada is, and in a second we'll find out who they think he is, what can we say about him? He could perform miracles or witchcraft, whatever you want to call it. No one here is saying that he couldn't. We're just saying these were bad ones. They're not our kind. They're not, calling on a good deed. I don't know if we were familiar with the Harry Potter movies, right? Or books, right? There's like the black magic and good magic. So it depends on who does it and where did the source of that magic comes from, right? That's what this is about, right? So the outcome is supernatural. No one is saying that this guy couldn't do it. And in a second, you'll see why it's important. They're acknowledging his ability to perform supernatural acts. They're just calling it witchcraft. So far, so good. So who is this guy? So the Rambam is like, wait. You calling him Ben Stada? We thought his name is Ben Pandira. Okay. Who's Ben Pandira? Okay. So Ben Stada, Ben is the son of, right? Son of Stada. And they're like, oh, is he the son of Stada, the son of Pandera? What was his name? Was his father? So then Chizah says, oh, I have a way to solve this. How am I going to solve this? The husband was Stada and the lover was Pandera, right? When you say someone is the son of, right? It actually sounds better. It's a joke that works better in Hebrew because it's Baal and Boel, right? The husband and the one who owns. These are a wordplay, Baal and Boel, right? So he says, okay, a same person can be called the son of his biological father and the son of his legal father. That works. You can have both names, right? The son of. So this guy, his father was Stada and his biological father was actually Pandera. And then we're good. What is he saying about this guy, the son of Stada? Yeah, he is. I think there's a better word in English than how's that called? Illegitimate son. Sorry, I always get Americans correct my English. Mamzer we say in Hebrew, right? Someone who's not an actual biological, legitimate son. So illegitimate son. So we're saying about this guy, he's an illegitimate son. You're getting where I'm saying that, right? Slowly, we're having someone who went to Egypt, learned to do miracles or witchcraft or some supernatural things, and he is an illegitimate son. Okay. But then they say, but not, wait. We know the name of the legal husband. It wasn't Sada. It was Papos, Ben Yehuda. What are you talking about? It doesn't work. It's like, oh yeah, there's this third option for the son of, and that's actually the person who, carried in his belly for 9 months and gave birth to him. We think of her last, but maybe the name of the mother was Stada. So the same person can be called the son of Stada. That's fine. The son of Papos and the son of Pandira. And that's good. It's all the same person or more good. So they have different tradition about this guy, right? Now, why would they call the mom Stada? And then they say his mother, actually, his name was not Stada, but actually Miriam or Mary, right? And then they say about her, a woman who lets her hair grow long. And in Hebrew, it's Magdala Se'ar Nashaya. She's Magdala. So she's Mary Magdalene, right? Now, Let's stop for a second and talk about Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene in the New Testament, who is she? She's not Jesus' mom. She is Jesus's friend. And she is from a city called Migdal in the north of Israel. And this is why she's called Magdalene. And here they're doing a wordplay about her. She grew her hair long. Now let's stop and talk about the ancient times. If a woman grows her hair long and let it show, and she wears it, openly, that definitely means that there's something very free about her. Right? She's I ask my younger students in Israel, they say zoremet in Hebrew. That's like she goes with the flow. Right? She's someone who's I don't know, what's the word in English? Help me. Licentious. I can't say that. Can't say that in English. Okay, so you know what I mean by this, right? So someone who's immoral in the sexual acts, right? So that's what they say about her. And this is what they say about her in Pumbedita, the one who turns away from her husband, and that's in Aramaic, satat da mibala. And this is how we get to the stada part, right? So she turns away from her husband. Okay. So what do we know about this guy according to the Talmud? This guy is an illegitimate son, right? His mother cheated on his father. He went to Egypt and learned to do supernatural things and something with Mary. Now, by the way, the fact that Mary Magdalene is not the mother of Jesus is confusing to everyone in the ancient world. There's a lot of Mary, a lot of Miriam. There's Mary Magdalene, there's Mary, his mother, and there's a third Mary that finds him in the grave or goes to guard his grave. So Mary is very confusing, and we actually find in the church fathers a lot get the two confused. So the fact that the rabbis get this confused, it's fine. But obviously we see that this is a tradition about Jesus. And in fact, we do see Jesus being called the son of Pandira in other places as well. So Jesus, the son of Pandira. Later it becomes Jesus the Nazarene, but we do have in early sources the name son of Pandira. So the rabbis basically are saying about him that he is not the son of God, but rather a son of a different guy, not his dad, right? So that's what the rabbis are saying according to the Talmud. But they don't deny the fact that Jesus could perform miracles. That's super important to notice. In the ancient world, the assumption is that if everyone says that you can do miracles, we're good with that. No one's denying the fact that Jesus can do miracles, and that's kind of consistent in all rabbinic sources, but it's witchcraft. It's not the kind of miracles we're good with. But this is very important. They knew that there was something special about this guy. They're just saying he learned it from Egypt. What do we know from the New Testament? That Jesus actually went to Egypt. We have tradition of him going to Egypt. The fact that Egypt is the source of all miracles and witchcraft, that's actually a known thing. It goes back to the Bible. We know that Pharaoh had, magical assistant, that the Khaltumim that could do stuff like Moses and competed with Moses about, magic making. So Jesus, and that's just not that in all kind of tradition, that makes sense. But the rabbis say that about him. Now, why would they call him the son of Pandira though? What's this name? And that name is never explained in the entire rabbinic corpus. They just call him the son of Pandira and they don't tell us why. And this is, and you really be prepared because I'm going to show you one of the coolest things ever, because that almost never happened in my profession. And I can solve that mystery and it's kind of awesome. So really be prepared. We don't know why he's called son of Pandira and the rabbis never explained, but we had a guy called Celsus who wrote a work in 177 CE called The True Word. That guy was a pagan, a Greco-Roman Greek philosopher, and he writes a book called The True Word, which comes out against Christianity. It's very strongly. Christianity is like this new religion, doesn't like it at all. He fights against it. The thing is that this guy, Origen, I think there's a mistake in his name. It's not Origin like that. It should be an E, right? It's not Origin, it's Origin. And Origin doesn't like his book. So he writes a book against him called Contra Celsu, against Celsus, right? So he writes a book against him. And he quotes a lot of the things that Celsus says and then refutes them. Funny thing in history, No one knows who Celsus is. He's kind of lost because the pagans lost and no one, if he just kept quiet, we would have just lost it. But he didn't. He quotes him. And the only way we know about this work of art is because he quoted him and argued against him. And thank God he did, because we actually have two passages in Cultura Kelsum that actually tells us a testimony that, again, this Greco-Roman guy, this Greek guy, tells us what Jews were saying in his time. Origen then quotes what this Greek guy said the Jews say. Are you with me? So we're going to read now what Origen says that the Greek guy said that the Jews said. So far, so good? Told you it's going to be cool, but it's worth it. Wait. So he portrayed, says Origen about this Celsus guy, he portrays the Jew having a conversation with Jesus himself, refuting him on many charges. So the Jews is very upset about Jesus and he's refuting him. And then he starts quoting him. And every time it's a quote from Celsus, it's like slanted, right? He fabricates. So what does the Jew say? He fabricated the story of his birth from a virgin. And he reproached him because, the Jews say, he came from a Jewish village and for a poor country woman who made her living by spinning. What are you talking about, being a son of God? The virgin? We know that woman. She works in spinning. Now, let's stop here for a second. It's like growing your hair in public. Spinning in the ancient world should be done in like a dark room on your own. You cannot do that in public. Why? Because spinning involves you extending your head and doing all kinds of movement that are considered extremely tempting. So women should never do that in public. This is like, and his mom, she spins. Like, virgin? Not so much. We know that woman. What are you talking about? So the Jews are like, what? What is this? This is what the Jews are saying. And this is in 177 CE. Right? So Celsus is quoting a Jew, I don't know, beginning of the 2nd century somewhere, saying that about Jesus. What are you talking about? We know his mom. What virgin? And he says that she was driven out by her husband, who was a carpenter by trade, when she was convicted of adultery. So she cheated on this carpenter husband of her, and he kicked her out. And then he says that after she had been driven out by her husband, and while she was wandering disgracefully, she secretly bore Jesus. So now the Gospels tells us that he was born, this is something that the gospel know, he was born in like a manger. Now, the reason they're doing this is because they had to flee from whatever persecution, or there was a census, they had to go, there's no room in the inn, all kinds of stories. The story the Jews are saying, it's like, yeah, she was in a manger because she was kicked out of their house and she was pregnant and a child that wasn't her husband. That's the real reason she was giving birth in a manger. And he says that because Jesus was poor, he hired himself out as a laborer in Egypt. There we go. He was in Egypt, but the reason he went to Egypt is because no one would hire him. So he went to Egypt and there learned certain magical powers which the Egyptians are proud to have. Ooh, that we know. That one we know that the Jews are saying about them. By the way, I just want to point out something, and this is what makes it extremely cool. We read this in the Talmud, which was redacted in the 6th or 7th century, but now we have actual testimony of Jews saying that stuff about Jesus in the 2nd century. So now we know that they're saying that he was actually an illegitimate son, that he went to Egypt, he could perform miracles, but just because he learned it from the Egyptians, right? So all the stuff that they're saying about Jesus in the Talmud, they've already been saying for like hundreds of years, right? So this is something that the Jews have traditions about Jesus. So far, so good, which is kind of cool in itself, but that's not the coolest I wanted to show you. It's cool in itself, but not the cool thing I wanted to show you. And he returned full of pride in his powers and gave himself the title of God. This is what the Jews are saying about Jesus. Very cool. But look at this last passage. Let us return, however, says Celsus, quoted by Origen, put in the mouth of the Jew. The mother of Jesus is described as being turned out by the carpenter who was engaged to her. This time it's engagement and not marriage, which is interesting. But look at that last sentence. Because she had been convicted of adultery and had a child by a soldier named Panthera. Okay. That's why I told you it's so cool. Seriously. And we've solved the problem of why the Jews are calling Jesus the son of Panthera without explaining. Because they give the father the name of Panthera of a Roman soldier. And we're going to talk about this in a second. So first of all, the fact that we have an outside source explaining why the rabbis called him the son of Panthera, this is like calling him the son of Panthera is saying the son of the Roman soldier. That's the way they call him all the time. It's a horrible insult. He calls himself the son of God, calls himself the son of a virgin woman. We call him the son of the Roman soldier. That's how the Jews call Jesus. And we have a 2nd century testimony that explained that name that was never explained in rabbinic literature. But even cooler than that, is this is what Paulus Cassel in the 19th century says. Why Panthera? So let's talk about it a second. Why would the rabbi call that Roman soldier Panthera of all names? So first of all, in Hebrew, we have that tradition. I don't know if that exists in English. When you call kids by the names of strong animals, you want to give them the persona. So you would feign Aryeh, like a lion. Or Leo, right? Leo is a name of a lion because you want the personality. Or I don't know, you would say Tzvi, right? In Hebrew. I don't know if English does that so much. Maybe not so much. But in Hebrew, that's very... Same thing with Romans. They used animals' names. And one of the names that they use is Panther. That's actually a very strong name. I urge you to consider it next time you have a grandson or something. Panther, maybe we should bring this back. We actually know that because they have grave marks of Roman in late antiquity. And we have the name Panthera all over the place. This is a strong name. It's a suggesting, powerful name. But what's cool about this name is that it sounds very, very similar to another word. So Panthera is panther. But, so this is Pantheros for panther, but Parthenos is virgin. So whoever came up with that name is like, oh, you're saying you're the son of a Parthenos? We say you are the son of a Pantheros, right? You call yourself the son of a virgin. We call you the son of a Roman soldier. So the rabbis are actually being clever about the insult. Right? So you're saying you're the son of a virgin, a Parthenos, but we're calling you the son of a Pantheros. So again, look how cool that was, seriously. We had an outside source only preserved in the writing of a Christian writer arguing with a Greek guy who is long gone and no one knows about him, but because he quotes him, and he quotes a Jew in the early 2nd century saying about Jesus the stuff that's found in the Talmud without explanation, and we got to explain what it means and learn of an old Jewish joke mocking Jesus by using a wordplay on Parthenos and Pantheros, right? And mocking him for not being a son of God, but actually a son, not a son of a virgin, but a son of a Roman soldier. And actually that's a very Jewishy thing to do. We actually have a Tosefta in Avodah Zarah saying that we are actually obligated to mock Christians or pagan worshipers. This is our obligation as Jews to mock them. So this is something that the Tosefta actually endorses, like rabbinic literature is something that they would do, and this is why it's not surprising to find it. Not very nice, but this is what the rabbis did. And this is how we explain what the rabbis did. Are you good? We just learned what the rabbis say about Jesus. Source number 1. Okay, son of Panthera, he's not the son of God, not the son of a virgin woman. He is a son of a Roman soldier. His mom was spinning. She was growing her hair, right? I explained it. She went along with a Roman soldier, and he went to Egypt to learn magic, and he could do miracles. That's all the stuff we learned about Jesus so far. Okay, ready to go one more? Okay, next one. So this is where I wanted to show you manuscript version versus wait, you told me I can do the pointer thing. Let's see if you can you see my pointer? Oh, an improvement from last week. Okay. Oh, last time. Yeah. Same. This is a very high, proficiency in, very Jewishy thing. Yeah. So look at this is the printed version, and this is the word in we're going to read the text, and you're going to see it in a second, that the last 3 words, Jesus the Nazarene, is not found in the printed edition, and it only found in manuscript, and then kind of highlighted for you if you can read the Hebrew. But let's read the thing. So what does it say? It says, this is actually a really, really interesting passage, and I love it because it really shows how this is a very male text. Extremely male. So that text is from Sanhedrin, and the text deals with a verse from Psalms. And this verse in Psalms says, "No evil shall befall you, no plague will approach your tent." That's the verse in Psalms. And the rabbis sit together and they say, wait, what's the worst thing that can happen to you? If I'll have to stop here for a second and do this exercise with you, and you close your eye for a second and you say, what's the worst thing that can happen to you? I'm not going to ask you that, but think about it for a second. What would be your answer? I know what would be my answer. Something about the health of my children, health of my parents, right? This is the demise of my country, right? All kinds of stuff that, what's the worst thing that can happen to you? And then we get the answers that the rabbis give. And seriously, these are like hilarious. So to look at the second one, someone has to like do psychology of the rabbis from this. So no plagues will report your tent. What's the option? That you will not find your wife, nida, sexually impure, when you return from a journey, right? So that's like the worst thing that can happen to you. You went away on a journey and you came back and you can't have sex with your wife because she's menstruating. That's the worst thing that can happen to you. Like you read this and you're like, okay, that's such a male text. Like seriously, that's the worst thing that can happen to you, right? So this is a really, really interesting text. But what's like one of the answers that they give, and this is where we come in, that's the last one. So no plague will approach your tent, that you will not have a son or a disciple who publicly spoils his food, like Jesus the Nazarene. Now, the words like Jesus the Nazarene is only found in manuscript, and it's erased in the printed edition. Now, let's talk a little bit for a second. First of all, how is Jesus described? So the worst thing that can happen to you is what? That you have a son or a disciple that spoils his food in public. So we'll talk about it in a second, about spoiling the food thing in a second. But let's see first, Jesus is given as an example for what? Someone who did something very bad. We'll talk about it in a second. What's that thing? But more importantly than that, what is Jesus described as? Nazarene, that's true, but he is an example for a son, right? Or a disciple. If we need one example of the thing that like can go really, really wrong, and actually I can get that as an answer, as opposed to the previous one, the worst thing that can happen to you is that your son turns into something horrible, right? One of those, when you see I don't know, a murderer or something, right? Actually, my son joined a cult or something like that, right? Or so this is one of those things that I remember my sons at some point, I have twin boys. I think one of them asked me at some point, will you always love me no matter what? And the answer should be, yes, I will always love you no matter what. But that made me give me pause, right? Is there a scenario where I stop loving my son? And I think there might be some scenarios where, he turns totally monstrous or something. But this is something that's worth thinking about. And this is what they're saying. That's the worst thing that can happen to you when you stop loving your son or disciple. Now, what's the example for that? The example is Jesus. So we started off with Jesus being something we mock horribly, right? Because he calls himself a son of a virgin, but in fact he's not. And his mom is like a whore or whatever. And this is all kinds of a thing. And now he's brought as an example of someone who did something very bad and you're very sad about, but he's also either your son or your disciple. So whoever writes this remembers Jesus being an example of someone who was once a Jew for sure, but more than that. Yes, but I think here it's more than that. He is so close to us, like a son or a disciple, that's the worst thing that can happen to you, that he turns out to be Jesus. This is something completely different. Whoever writes this remembers Jesus as an example for someone who was once so close that this is heartbreaking. And that's the worst thing that can happen to you, that he turns out to be Jesus. That's different. I told you I'm going to do something a little bit complex today. We're going to see stuff that are not nice about Jesus. But it always comes in with something a little bit more complex than that. And we're going to see this in the next story even more strongly. The rabbis still preserve the knowledge as late as the Babylonian Talmud. There's something about Jesus. He used to be one of us. And it's heartbreaking. And it's, gut-wrenching, the fact that he turned out to be something else. That's the worst thing that can happen to you. And Jesus is the example. So he turned out to be really bad. And that's why he's the example for that. But they also remember that he used to be one of us, and a very close one at that. Now, what does it mean to spoil your food in public? Any guesses? Okay, something that has to do with dietary laws, but why spoils his food, right? He makes them non-kosher or something, or he eats them in public. It's very clear there's something about spoiling, right? Something very bad, and also in public, right? What else? What else can that be? So dietary laws is a good guess. So for this, we have to talk a little bit about euphemisms in rabbinic literature. So, did not work. Okay. So spoils is food. People actually understood this to be a very crucial thing. So for example, in Tractate Gittin about divorce, it says that Rabbi Akiva says you can divorce your wife even if she spoils your food. So we see scholars such as Moore in the 60s writing bad cooking is more a serious ground for divorce than some modern one, right? So he reads the Mishnah Gittin and he says, spoiling the food is very bad. But the truth is that the rabbinic literature uses euphemisms for to talk about certain things. And for this, I want to read you the following story, which I really love. The story, comes from Tractate Brachot. Tractate Brachot takes the question of mentor rabbi student relationship and puts it all the way to the end. So we have a series of stories about this guy who's a very annoying guy named Rav Kahana. He's seriously annoying. He wants to know, so he follows his master everywhere. So for example, he goes after his master to the bathroom and he looks under his stall. And when he get caught, he says, what do you want? This is Torah and I need to learn it, how to wipe your butt according to the Torah, right? So, but the story, what does the story try to do? The story starts to say, we keep saying you have to follow your master. How far do we take it? How far do you follow my master? Everything he does, everything says, yes, so that's included, right? We have to look and see. And then the Talmud actually talks about how to wipe your butt. If you wanna, I can tell you. But in any case, the rabbis really, so this is something. So the rabbis really take that all the way to the end. And this is one of those stories. Good question. You read the story yet. Wait, let's read the story. So Rav Kahana once went and hid under Rav's bed. What is he trying to learn now, right? So he heard him, his rabbi, chatting with his wife, joking, and doing what he was required. Right? So he's under the bed and he's hearing them, what? Having sex, right? But he's very surprised. And he says to him, one would think that Abba's mouth has never sipped the dish before. Now he says that openly and loudly. And remember, the people on the bed don't know that he's there. So they look under the bed and the rabbi says, Kana, are you here? Get out. This is rude. And he replied, it is a matter of Torah and I require to learn it. This is a part of a series of stories where he says, it's his Torah and I need to learn it. And this is where the story ends. We don't hear what the wife thought about the fact that there's a student under their bed, but the rabbis are less concerned about that. But again, it's obviously supposed to be a funny story, and it's supposed to be, there's 2 years ago, I was asked to participate in a volume of the magazine called Moment, the Jewish, and they did a thing for Purim, actually. This is timely. I'll send you the link. You can follow it. It says, your favorite Jewish joke. It's very honored to be on the same page as Sarah Silverman and Jason Alexander, all kinds. And they asked me, what's my favorite joke, Jewish joke? And I gave that one. And I said, it's supposed to be funny, right? It's supposed to make us like push the limits of Jewish, a rabbi, master, student. But it's also very critical of their own, right? It's how do we deal with that? But it's funny because it's sex and it's like you imagine the scene and it's a funny scene, right? The rabbis are using a funny scene to talk about an important topic that they want to push the boundaries. Okay. All that to tell you, because, you should learn that story. That's something that all of us should do. But in addition to that, look at what he uses when he's surprised. What is he saying? He's saying, it seems that Abba's mouth has never sipped the dish before. I think you're right. There's something about oral sex here. But in English, he's surprised about, what is he surprised about? There's some kind of like chatting and talking before that. They're not lying there thinking of England, right? They're doing fun stuff in bed. And he's very surprised about that, right? So that's something that he's very surprised. But he doesn't say that. He uses a euphemism. And the euphemism he uses is from the word of the kitchen and the food, right? So food is a euphemism from sex. Actually, we know that from a lot of cultures. That's not new. You talk about, there was a movie with Julia Roberts. How was that called? Love, Eat, Love, Eat, Pray, Love. Eat, love, pray, eat something, one of those, right? And this is a lot about that, right? The food, this is Julia Orbitz. She's very pretty, and she says she never had carbs, so she goes to Italy and she eats, and then she has sex, and she also finds it's very, meditative or whatever, and it's all combined, and it's really about that. And this has always been the case in ancient cultures, that food has to do with sex, and they use that when they talk about sex. They use the euphemism of. So, having said all that and learning that about the rabbis, living in the world that they live, and going back, what does that mean to say about Jesus that he spoils his food in public? What does he do? He's being, I don't know if he actually has sex in public, but he has some, sexual matters and publicly. What do we know about Jesus? Who are his friends? Who does Jesus walk around with? Disciples. Who are his disciples? Where did they come from? So they're fishermen, which is like the worst of the worst. They're like the poorest and whatever. There's tax collectors, which are even worse than fishermen. Like no one likes them. They're like the whole horror, that they sell their soul for big tax collectors. And lastly, whores, right? He goes, Mary Magdalene is one of them. Do you know Dan Brown's book, the Da Vinci Code? Have you ever? So that's all about how they try to minimize, and I think that's kind of true. That's one of the very few things about this book that's true. That they try to minimize the roles of the whores in the life of Jesus because it doesn't work very well. But we do have evidence of Jesus going around with a lot of women who are whores. He really walks around with the lowest of the social economic strata of his time. So that makes sense, actually. The rabbis would say he is the kind of guy who's not careful sexually and in public, and he doesn't mind. So again, so the rabbis are saying about Jesus, he has a problem with sex. He's doing that publicly, and he's not ashamed about this. But he used to be one of us. And it's very, very sad. It's the worst thing that can happen to you, that he was once one of us, like a son or a disciple, and he turned bad, sexually bad. That's what we know about Jesus. Notice that they don't say he turned bad because he invented another religion. Nope. They don't say he's turned bad because, I don't know, he blasphemous or something. They're not going theologically with this. They're accusing Jesus. Jesus' sin is being sexually inappropriate in public. That's interesting, I think, in itself. That brings him to the next story. And again, I'm showing you where it should have been in the Talmud, where the arrow is. There is nothing there. And this is where it is. This entire passage we're going to read is found in manuscript. It's a long one. This is the longest story we have about Jesus, and it's not there. It just doesn't exist in the printed version. And this is what we're reading. This is the Hebrew. We're going to read the English. So that's the following incident. What was the incident with Yeshua ben Pachia? So the Talmud says something about the Yeshua ben Pachia, and they're like, okay, so that's the story. When King Yanai killed the rabbis, Rabbi Yeshua ben Pachia fled to Egyptian Alexandria. By the way, the time frame that the rabbis say, King Yanai, not the time phrase. He was way before, 2nd century BC. That doesn't work at all with the sources. But the rabbis, they want to say that there were a king that, persecuted someone. We'll see in a second. The Pharisees. We know that King Yanai persecuted the Pharisees. That explains it. So they kind of stick it in. It doesn't work chronologically at all, but it doesn't matter. The rabbis don't care so much about history. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Pachia, that guy, goes to Egypt. That should sound familiar because we heard about Egypt already, right? So that's going to be a clue. And there was peace. Shimon ben Shattach sent the following message. So what do we know about King Yanai? He was married to Shlom Tzion. Shlom Tzion was the sister of Shimon ben Shattach. And he was a Pharisee, and Yanai supported the Sadducees. We're not going to talk about any of this because it's not important for us. But in any case, Shimon ben Shattach says to Yeshua ben Pachia, he sends him a letter, and he says, from Jerusalem, the holy city, to you, Alexandria, oh, my sister, my husband dwells in your midst, and I remain desolate. So he sends him this enigmatic letter in code. And from this, Yeshua ben Pachia understands that he can come back. So he's in Egypt. The guy sends him a letter, you can come back. And he comes back from Egypt to Palestine. And on the way, it's a long journey. He has to stop in an inn. So he stops on the way in an inn. And he said, and they paid him great respect because this is Yeshua ben Pachia. He comes with his entourage. Everyone's very happy about him, give him great respect. So he says, how beautiful, this works only in Aramaic, it doesn't work in Hebrew, in English. How beautiful is this achsania? Now, achsania can mean both the inn itself and the innkeeper, right? It's the word for both. So he says, how beautiful is this inn, right? How, they're treating me so nicely. And he says, how beautiful is this inn? But then Jesus says, and all of a sudden we find out that Jesus was with him all along. When he went to Egypt, God came with him. And Jesus says, not that pretty. Her eyes are kind of crooked. She's like cross-eyed. How did Jesus understand he's saying? Jesus understood him to say that not the inn is pretty, but the innkeeper, right? So he hears his master looking at the inn, and he thinks that he's commenting on the inn, like, oh, she's so pretty. And he's like, not that great. Her eyes are like cross-eyed, right? Okay. When, of course, his rabbi wouldn't look at women, and he only talks about the inn. And so the rabbi gets very, very upset. And Yeshua ben Pachia replied, you wicked student, do you occupy with such thoughts? How can you even look at women and talk about this? And he sounded 400 shofar blasts and excommunicated him, because when you flee persecution, the first thing you pack in your suitcase is a shofar blow and 400 of them, and whatever, and you excommunicate. And he excommunicated him. Excommunication, by the way, in rabbinic literature is very rare and extremely harsh, and that you don't do it lightly. And they excommunicated him on the spot. That's what the story says. What do you think about that punishment, right? Think about it for a second, and how does the story portray? And then he says, the disciple came before him several times and said to him, receive me. So the story continues. I'm guessing they're back into the land of Israel, and he asks for forgiveness, and he comes, receive me, receive me, receive you. But Yeshua ben Pachia refused to take notice, doesn't want to accept him. Now, one day, when Yeshua ben Pachia was reciting the Shema, right? He's doing the Shema Yisrael, he's praying. The disciple came again before him. Jesus comes through the door and wants to him. And this time, Yeshua ben Pachia wanted to receive him. He was okay with forgiving him, but he was occupied in the prayer, and he'd make a gesture or something. He says to him, wait, I'm in the middle. But the disciple thought that Yeshua ben Pachia was again repelling him. He thought it was, pushing him away. So that's it. It was like the straw. Do you say that in English? The straw on the camel's, that broke the camel's back? That's the one. So that was the moment. And he went, set up a brick, and worshipped it. That's it. That's the moment of breaking. So Yeshua ben Pachia said to him, he runs to him and he said, repent. He answered him, no, I learned from you. Whoever sins and causes others to sin is deprived the power of doing repentance. So the rabbi changes his mind, says, come back. And he's like, no, I can't come back. Why can't I come back? Yeah. And also, you encourage others, but and succeeded. Not only have you encouraged others to sin, whoever causes others to sin, meaning at this point, it's just too late. I'm already successful. What is this? What is this story? This is what we call an origin myth. What does this describe? Yes, so that's the end of the story. He can't come back at this point. True. They know that he succeeded, and Jesus, But what does this entire story basically describes? What moment in history? Good. But it also described the moment of separation, right? This is the story that tells us he was once a student of the rabbis, so close to the rabbis, he actually followed his master to Egypt, right? This is, again, the rabbis know that Jesus was in Egypt this time because he needed to flee with his master, so they know that he's there. So he was once one of us. They also know that at some point something happened, and this is what this is described. And we know at this point, when this story is being told, we, in hindsight, can say he succeeded extremely well when he was done, so there is no going back. But what else does the story tell us? Oh, let's talk about the brick. So this is why when I read this story, I don't read it as historical at all. And I kind of make fun about the bringing the shofar with you to blow, to excommunicate, because, and also here presenting the establishment of a new religion as putting up a brick and worshiping it. What is this story is about? It's very crude, right? It's a story that talks about the essence of it. It's not about, so they say whatever religion that he came up with, it's idol worship. It's worshiping a brick. We don't like that one. And also, excommunicating it with shofar. It's not a historical question. It's symbolic, right? This is what it is. This is what it's about. That's good. But the story is very surprising if you look at it very carefully. Why is it surprising? Who's at fault here? Why? How did he mess up?
Inappropriate behaviors, what could have been fixed, arrived at the point where you can know.
Good. So first off, I think there's a clear, let's start with Jesus. Was he a good guy? According to the story? He's obviously a student of the rabbis, right? He follows him, he's part of his entourage, but also, yeah. Why? Because he looks at women. You're not supposed to look at women, right? So that kind of joins forces with what we know about him from a different, we just saw that, right? They know that Jesus has a thing with women, right? So that's not very nice. Okay, so he's not the greatest. But does he deserve, does this story describe the punishment being appropriate to the sin? No, it's very clear that whoever tells this story says, this was inappropriately, harsh. He gets excommunicated, which again is extremely rare in rabbinic literature. I can count the people who are excommunicated in rabbinic literature. There are very few of those. Very, very rare. And again, the fact that he refused to accept him and refused to accept him and refused to accept him, which leads to the misunderstanding at the end. But there is definitely a blame on Rabbi Yehoshua ben Pachia, who overreacts to that. So Jesus is kind of like iffy, but Rabbi Yehoshua ben Pachia is to blame. So what's the story trying to tell us? We remember Jesus was once one of us, but we also think that it could have been different. It could have been avoided. If we would have reacted differently, if he would have walked into the room at a different time when the guy wasn't praying, right? There's a misunderstanding here which kind of screws the whole thing up. It could have ended differently. Whoever tells the story knows that Christianity is already successful and it's a different religion and you can't bring the clock back. But it looks back on its own history of the separation and looks back and says, you know what? We could have handled it better. It could have really, really been different. We know this guy. He was once one of us. Again, joins forces with someone we know from the other rabbinic sources. He was one of us. Fine. He had a thing with ladies. That's good. But we overreact. It's our fault. There's a sense of, say that in English, the fisfus. There's a sense of missing out or something that went wrong or something that a screw up. I don't know how to say that nicely. Yeah, there's a sense of like this could have been really, really, really different. And they're saying that when they know the end result, it's very surprising to find in a rabbinic text as late as that, a view of Christianity that's, I don't know, kind of like taking the blame on ourselves partially, right? So Jesus is not perfect and he did that, but we kind of led him to that. We should have been more careful. It's kind of partly our fault. There's something here that's very, I don't know, self-reflective on Jewish-Christian relations. And surprisingly so. So when I say this was taken out, right, because, they don't want to, these texts, Jesus, being fond of women and stuff, these are not good texts. This is why they were taken out. But obviously they're not nice and Jesus worships bricks and he likes women and all that. But it's also a very surprisingly nuanced text that as late as the foundation of the Talmud, they still remember that it could have been different. They still remember that he was once one of us and it could have ended differently, which I think is extremely interesting. And again, look at how much they know about Jesus. They know about, Egypt. They know about, let's talk about other stuff that you can see in the story. So first of all, I want to show you this. Does anyone know what this is? So this is called an incantation ball. What are incantation balls? So incantation balls, am I not, is that okay? Incantation balls are an archaeological evidence that we found in that same area of the Babylonian Talmud, in thousands of them. And this is what scholars think. They have, they're like, I don't know, cereal box, balls. And they have writings from inside going in spiral around. And they have all kinds of like magic formula. Blah, 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 all kinds of stuff. Demons and like names and magic formulation. And we found them upside down. Oh, sorry. Sometimes they have pictures of demons drawn on them. So scholars think, and we found them upside down like this, buried on the ground under the entrance to houses or in the corner of houses. And scholars think that they were part of like some kind of a magical, you know how like we have a mezuzah on the doorpost, which is like to defend the house, and it's a pachapashpeik. The same thing, people used to do this to capture demons. Why would you want to capture the demon and keep it in the house? I don't know. People don't exactly know how it worked, but we have a lot of those, and they're very, very interesting because a lot of information is there. And guess what? We actually know that Rabbi Yoshua ben Pacha is actually mentioned in name in some of those things. So a demon Lilith, and he argues with her, and he's a magician, according to those incantation bowls. I brought all kinds of stuff. Actually, you can see, where's my bowl? Wait, this one. I don't know if you can see Rabbi Yoshua ben Pacha, I kind of circled it. You can see his name in some of the incantation balls. So Yoshua ben Pacha, Jesus's master, is known in those incantation bowls as a powerful magician. So that's interesting. Did it come after the story was born? So if he's connected to Jesus, then he's a powerful magician, or is it before, and that's why he's the name of Jesus? We don't really know, but that's interesting in itself. Something else I wanted to read to you is that in Matthew, one of the gospel, Jesus talks about, this is what's called the Sermon of the Mount. Jesus talks about what you shouldn't do. And Jesus says the following: you have heard that it is said by them all time, thou shalt not commit adultery. This is one of the 10 commandments, don't commit adultery. And Jesus said, but I say to you that whoever look on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. Jesus this is the entire passage in Matthew 5. Jesus is more frum. He's like more religious and more strict than the 10 commandments. And he says, committing adultery is even looking at a woman. And he says, if you look at a woman, if the right eye offend her, pluck it out and cast it from thee, which I actually kind of like about Jesus, because he doesn't say, if you lust a woman, go cover her up. He says, if you lust a woman, pluck your eye, right? It's the man's responsibility, not to lust, not the woman to cover herself up, which I kind of like prefer Jesus's way rather than my current government in Israel, who thinks differently. But this is Jesus. But look how cool that is. Whoever wrote the story in the Talmud knew that Jesus says that, because what does he say? Jesus is so strict, he doesn't even allow you to look at women. And what do they accuse women of Jesus of doing in the story? Looking at women, right? And what does he say about the woman? He accuses the woman of having crooked eye, and he says, pluck your eye. So there's something about eyes here. So whoever read the story is making fun of Jesus here. Like, he's so good about not looking at women. We know who he's hanging out with, and we know he had problems with women. So he's mocking them, right? So the story is not only complex, it also shows knowledge of Christian tradition in the text. Now I have to choose what to teach you. We want to learn about the death of Jesus, or we want to learn what happens to Jesus after he dies? You guys choose. After he dies. Okay. If we have time, we'll go back to the other one. Okay. Okay. So this is another passage. So how he died, which was a very interesting, you kind of answered fast. I wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about how he died. But maybe we'll have time to do it in the question and answers. So that's one, how he died. But after he dies, we have a very interesting tradition in that. And notice, by the way, again, the printed edition is on the top, and the manuscript edition that says Jesus as opposed to Push'ei Israel, the sinners of Israel. This was changed in the printed edition. So what's the story? The story is, and the reason I'm staying on the Hebrew for a second, I want to show you this in a second. The story is about Onkelos. So Onkelos is the guy, I don't know if maybe that name sounds familiar to you. We know that he made a translation, a Targum of the Torah into Aramaic. We call Targum Onkelos. That's one of, maybe the name sounds familiar to you. Now, the Talmud has a tradition about this guy. He actually converted. The reason he could do the translation is because he was eloquent in Aramaic, which was the language of the non-Jews, and he translated the Torah into that once he converts. Now, the Talmud says that guy, before he converted, he's not, he needed to make sure that that was a right decision. So what he does, he kind of like rises the dead, 3 non-Jews, and he wants to find out what happens to them after they dies to make sure that he's betting on the right team. Should he convert or not? That's kind of very smart of him. Not part of the conversion ceremony nowadays, but then it was. So he says, I don't know, by the way, what the reforms do, but in any case, he wants to check, is it worth it or not? So what he does, he goes and he raises from the dead Titus, who, destroyed the temple, not a good guy, whatever, what happened to him after that? And he raises Bilam. I didn't say Bilam in English. Bilam, yeah, the prophet who tried to curse Israel, Bilam. And the third one is Jesus, and he raises Jesus, and he asks them what happens to you after you die. So we're going to find out in a second what the rabbis imagine Jesus to have happened to him after he's died. Why am I bringing you, why are we getting stuck on this slide? Is because this is one example where manuscript is actually helpful in a different way. So usually when I'm looking for Jesus in printed edition, I can't find it, and I have to go to manuscript, and this is what I showed you. One manuscript is a little bit different. This is a manuscript that's found in the Vatican Library. And when you look at the Jesus story there, you actually can see that some of the words I'm about to read to you is actually made into gibberish. You can't read this. But someone went over this and corrected this, that you can't read what's written there because it's very nasty about Jesus. We'll read it in a second. So this is one example where I think the fact that this manuscript is found in the Vatican is no coincidence. Someone knew how to read this and didn't like what's there and kind of like corrected it. So this is one example where the manuscript is corrected as well, not just the printed edition. That's why I want to bring it to you. So let's read what happened to Jesus after he died. So Onkelos, son of Clonicus, was son of Titus's sister, and he had a mind to convert himself to Judaism, and he went and raised Titus from the dead by necromancy. Number one. And then he went and raised Bilam by necromancy. That's what I told you. And now, last one. He went and raised by incantation Jesus the Nazareans, or the sinner of Israel. That's what we find in the printed edition, out of his grave by necromancy. And he asked him, who is important in that world? Tell me, what's happening in the afterward? Who gets to? I'm just watching with my kids a series called The Good Place. Have you watched it on Netflix? It's kind of cool. It's all about, I'm not going to ruin it for you, but this is like what happened in the next world, right? This is kind of a thing. So he says, he wants to know what's important in the next world. And he replied, Israel. Don't forget, that's not actually a depiction of what's happened in the world to come. This is the imagination of the rabbis that if ever we would have information, for sure, that's what we'll find out. No guaranteed about that for me, but this is what they imagine. The rabbis imagine Jesus coming back and say, yeah, it's Israel. By the way, all 3 answer that question. So this is what the rabbis imagine, the end to be. And he says, what about joining them? And he's like, yep, you should. Seek their welfare, seek their warmth, whoever touch him, zakirat. So he's like, while I'm talking to you, can you tell me what your punishment is? And he says to him, boiling excrement. According to the rabbi, Jesus is sitting in the afterworld and he is sitting in boiling poop. By the way, Bilam sits in boiling semen. This is like fun stuff that's happened in the next world. Kind of like Dante's Inferno and all kinds of description of what you'd imagine. So this is what the rabbis imagine Jesus to be. By the way, that passage really has a bloody history. This is in all of the disputation of the medieval time. The Jews get punished awfully for that joke about Jesus in the afterworld. This is a bad one. So they imagine him to sit in boiling poop. And he says to him, why? And there's a reason why. Since the master has said, whoever mocks the words of the sages is punished with boiling excrement. That's the punishment for And what is Jesus' sin? We saw a few sins by Jesus. We saw him liking women, right? Spoiling his food in public, right? We saw him liking women again, putting up a brick, which was closer and causing others to sin. That was a sin. What's his real sin here, for which is horribly, horribly punished in the afterworld? Whoever mocks the word of the sages is punished with boiling excrement. According to this, Jesus's great sin is not founding another religion, is not spoiling his food in public, is not going around with women, is mocking the words of the sages. What does that mean? Well, I think it obviously relates to the fact that he, comes up with a different religion, right? He was once a sage. He knows what the rabbis are saying. He's saying something else, and he's coming up with a different system. But it's not about that. It's about defying authority of the rabbis. And that's, by the way, who's telling the stories? The rabbis themselves, right? So they're like, ooh, whoever defies us, this is what will happen to him. Again, rabbinic imagination, right? This is what they imagine the afterworld to be, all about them. If you defy them, this is what will happen to you. This is what their imagination of what will happen in the afterworld, but this is what they do. Now, that's what their answer. Now, a scholar named Peter Schaefer, who used to teach at Princeton, wrote a book about Jesus in the Talmud, and he suggests that the reason that he's specifically in boiling excrement has to do with this passage in Matthew again, in Matthew 15. And the Matthew 15 says this: some Pharisees and teacher of the law, this is a very famous passage, came to Jesus from Jerusalem and asked, why is your disciple break the tradition of the elders? They don't wash their hands before they eat. There's something that has to do with dietary laws. There's some tradition that Jesus' students don't wash their hands as they should. They eat without purity. And Jesus called the crowd to him and said, listen and learn. What goes into someone's mouth does not defile them, but what comes out of the mouth, that what defiled them. So Jesus is a revolutionary. He says, you keep so much attention about what goes into your mouth, dietary laws, and not enough attention to what comes out, what you say, how you treat your poor, what you talk, what you teach. This is very consistent with Matthew. Matthew all around present Jesus. Matthew is where Jesus is said to have said, I have not come to abolish the law. I am not here to abolish the law. I just want to tell you, do whatever the Pharisees tell you to do. Just don't act like they do, because they're all hypocrites and they don't do what they tell you to do, but they're telling you all the right things to do. Just they're not doing it. That's Jesus's Matthew. Here as well, he said their priorities are screwed. They're paying so much attention to dietary laws. This is what they criticize others for, but they don't criticize themselves and others for misbehaving. Notice he's not saying that you shouldn't wash your hands. He's not saying that. And this was read later on in Christian tradition to abolish dietary laws. That's a very famous passage, according to which Jesus doesn't care about dietary laws. But the truth is, if you read Matthew carefully, that's not what he's saying. He's saying it's not as important as what you do with your mouth. This is what Jesus says, which I kind of like sign off on. It's a good thing to do, right? People are so careful about certain things, but not about much more important things, right? I was just interviewed. I don't know if you've heard about this Bible Sassoon, Codex Sassoon, that's being sold at Sotheby's. Have you heard about this? So like the most ancient from 10th century Bible is being sold at Sotheby's. It's going to be like the most expensive Bible ever sold, or actually most expensive book ever sold. It's between $30 to $50 million. And I was interviewed about this in the radio. So I'm telling all the information, and they're asking me about this and the importance of it, whatever. And then the interviewer turns to me and he says, at the end of the interview, and he says, do you think the state of Israel should invest that money and buy it? And I said, you're putting me in hot water, because I don't. I think there's more important things to do with $50 million in Israel at this point. And I said, but I'm sure all the other scholars who are hearing me, thank God it was like an interview in the morning, and I think not a lot of people did, but I think, getting me in hot water, because some scholars might say that this is worth it, but I don't, because there's more important things to do, I think, with $50 million than buy a book. But read it. Yeah, true. Very true. My problem with my current government is that they read the Bible too much, but back to us. Seriously, so Jesus is saying it's all about priority, and you're not doing the priority straight. That's what Jesus is saying. But Peter Schaefer suggests that you can also read what he's saying a little bit differently. It doesn't matter what comes into your mouth, but what comes out of your body. What comes out of your body? Yep, poop, right? This is all about that. So Peter Schiffer says, oh, whoever writes the story knows this and mocking this and say, oh yeah, that's what's important. Okay, that's what you'll do when you're in the afterlife. You'll sit in boiling pool. I don't know if it's true, but I think it does have something to do with Jesus's occupation with purity and bodily fluids, and has something to do with that. So this is about Jesus, and we have, I don't know, 10 minutes left or something like that. So we can do the other source, or we can ask question. We can do either. Michael, it's up to you. I'm done with the Jesus. And by the way, congratulations, you're almost expert in Jesus tradition in the Talmud, because we're almost done. I have that one last source that we didn't get a time to go through, but let me just summarize what we did here today and in all 3 lectures altogether. What I wanted to show today, and I think that's an important lesson for us to, did I do something wrong?
No, keep going.
Okay. So what I wanted to show you in those 3 lectures is the Christianity and Judaism in those first formative years of both religions came in contact much more than previously thought in research. And especially the Babylonian Talmud has a lot to teach us about that. We looked at explicit mention of Christianity, which is today's class. We looked at in-between heretic stories that we kind of need outside Christian intervention with. And we even looked at passages that don't mention Christianity at all, but still portrays knowledge of Christianity. All that to say, and this is what my research does, is that the Talmud has a lot to teach us about Jewish-Christian interaction, and it should be studied and looked at, because that teaches us so much about both religion and the way they were formed side by side in conversation. Today's class, we focus on the fact that Jesus is a problem. They know by this point that Jesus is very successful because he managed to convince others this is why he cannot come back. They know that this is the big winner of the ancient world all the way to today. This is the winner. They know that by this point, that they're the losers, and that's the big winner of the ancient world. But still, they have to deal with that figure and its origin from their circles, from rabbinic circles, and they know about this. And they're dealing with that. It's complex. First of all, it shows hostility. He's sitting in boiling poop. He has a thing with women. He is our worst fear, turned bad, right? This is what they know about Jesus. They're hostile to him. And, again, bloody history. Second of all, they remember at this late point that he was once one of ours. This is very much portrayed in the stories about Jesus. They know that he was once one of them, and also portraying, very surprisingly, a sense of something missing. We screwed up this one. It could have ended differently, and it's our fault. There's a misunderstanding, but it is also our fault, and there's a sense of sadness here that it could have ended differently, and that's still preserved in a late source. And this is very interesting to find. That's number 2. And number 3, and for me as a historian, that's the important thing. These traditions also portray knowledge of Christianity. To create that nuanced atmosphere, they needed to know a lot about Jesus. That's for me as a historian, and this is kind of ties into the other 2 lectures, that whoever writes the rabbinic tradition in the Talmud knows a lot about Christianity. They know about monks in caves. They know about disputation about the Holy Spirit that we saw. They know about Jesus saying, cut your eye out. They know a lot about Christianity. That's a historical fact that we didn't know before. Jews knew about Christianity enough to make those sources. For me as a historian, and this is what I try to share with you, this is new and exciting and interesting because it shows the potential the Talmud has to teach us about the knowledge of those both religious communities and what that knowledge did to each religious communities when they came into contact. And this is what this is about. The study of Christianity in the Talmud is about the meeting of those 2 religious communities and how they operated side by side and interacted with each other. And I hope we had a good time looking at this and kind of understood the importance of it for the study of the history of those 2 religious communities. Thank you.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually stop the sharing of the slide so that people can see you. And I'm going to invite you all. We have a few minutes left If you have any questions, either stemming from today's conversation, today's lecture, or from the previous two, if you want to ask something, and that also goes for people who are online, you can put your questions in the chat. Go for it.
Good question. Thank you for that.
They'd like to hear the story that they didn't hear.
Good. Do you want to see if someone here has a question about what I just said? If not, I'll do the story. I think I like her very much. I just
Okay.
want to say,
There we go.
I like you all, but she's a winner of
we-
my
We
favorite.
all do. We all do. Okay, share screen. Okay, so we're going back to the,
Sharing.
there we go. Okay. So
Okay.
that people online can see.
Ready? Let's do one more, because then you'll be really expert in all the Jesus traditions, because that's what you want to do. Okay. So this is about Jesus's death. That's the missing piece that we didn't have. Let's talk a little bit about that. So this is in Sanhedrin. This is about the procedure of putting someone to death. The rabbis live in a world that they can't put anyone to death. When this is written, the rabbis, the last time they could do that when there was the Chasmonaim state, that's about it. And until, 48, that, they didn't have an independent or an autonomy to kill anyone, but they live in a world where they imagine that they did. The rabbis talk about their past, they imagine having the power to do so. And this is the context in which it says. And they're trying to say how you do it and what's the procedure. And as part of that discussion, they talk about Jesus. And this is what they say. However, in contradiction, it was taught that on the Sabbath eve and the eve of, let's ignore the Sabbath eve, and the eve of Passover, Jesus the Nazarene was hanged. So they're talking about how many days before that you have to announce it, and that's the context. And then he says, a herald went forth before him 40 days, heralding Jesus the Nazarene is going forth to be stoned because he practiced sorcery and instigated and seduced Israel to idolatry. Whoever knows anything in his defense may come and state it. Since they did not find anything in his defense, they hanged him on the eve of Passover. That's the story we have in Sanhedrin. Again, let me state that very clearly. Jews couldn't kill anyone. But what does the Babli think? Who killed Jesus? According to the Talmud? Who? They did. The Jews did. Who else has been blaming the Jews for taking part of the killing of Jesus?
Yes.
Christians. Very early on. This is already in John, the book of John. There's but again, in the Christianity is like the Jews forcing the Romans to kill Jesus, egging him on, saying, yeah, you should kill him, blah, blah, blah. This is, the rabbis don't have a problem with that. They take full responsibility for the killing of Jesus. And again, not helpful for Jews in history, not a good position to take. But the rabbis take that position and have no problem with that. Again, nothing of this is historical. The only people doing the killing at this point are Romans, and they don't care what the Jews or the Christians are saying. They killed Jesus for their own reasons. But according to this, the rabbis take full responsibility for the killing of Jesus. Number one. Number two, they're saying that there was a herald that came along and said, this is part of the precision, that's the context in the Sugya, in the Talmud, that someone announced his killing and asked for someone to come. Do you do that in America? In Israel, we have that procedure when there's before the sentence is being given, you can come and give testimony for his, we call it character testimony. Does this exist in American law as well? Yeah. Okay. So character, so that's the thing. So they're asking, does anyone want to come and convince us that he shouldn't die? And guess what? No one comes. Now, this is interesting because what do we know about Jesus before he died? So Jesus says that to his students and he predicted that it will happen, and indeed it happens. They're all denying him. You'll deny me 3 times, he says, and this is what happens before the crows or whatever. You'll deny me. And again, so Jesus, it's very sad, actually. There's a very sad scene in the New Testament where Jesus feels very, very lonely at the end, like no one supports him. And it's a very human kind of moment. But the Talmud knows. The Talmud knows that in the moment of truth, he doesn't have anyone to defend him. So that's why he's being killed. That's number 2. Number 3, how does Jesus die according to the rabbis? He's hanged and stoned. So you hang someone and then you stone him after he's dead. Now, Have you seen Life of Brian, the stoning scene? Yeah, that's what you should have in mind. So this is, no, not like that, but in any case, so he's stoned and then how is he not killed? Crucifixion, because the rabbis don't kill by crucifixion. This is what Romans do. Rabbis kill by hanging and stoning. This is what they're like saying, even though that's like the one of the most famous thing that the way Jesus said, the rabbis like, no, he wasn't killed this way. We killed him. And if we killed him, this is how we would have killed him, not the way yours. We hanged him and then stoned him. Number 2 or 3, I forgot. One more. Why is he being killed? What's his sin? Remember, we saw a few sins attributed to Jesus. What's the sin here? Sorcery. We know that one. What does that mean? Remember, we talked about witchcraft and sorcery. He can do miracles. Again, no one's denying he can do miracles. The problem with his miracles are they're the wrong kinds. That's witchcraft and sorcery. We don't like that one. So he did that. And by doing that, he what? He instigated and seduced Israel to idolatry. He managed to convince them by doing miracles, which is true. That's part of how Jesus proves that what does he do in the New Testament? He heals the dead. He walks on water. He multiplies he heals the sick. He multiplies that. He raises the dead. He can do miracles. And that's what convinces everyone that he is the Messiah, right? He is the Son of God. So they know. They never denied that he didn't do it. They don't say whatever the New Testament says that he didn't do. No, they're good with that he did do it, but they're just saying it came from the wrong thing, and also like seduce people by doing that to go to the different religion and being successful at it. So that's his sin here. So again, this is, I try to kind of show that there is consistency in the tradition about Jesus. Also, this is what it says. One last point about this, which is extremely cool. Look at the timing. They say about Jesus that he was hanged when? Erev Pesach. So now let's talk a little bit about that. When was Jesus, this is actually, I brought you the picture. This is, you know that one? This is The Last Supper by Da Vinci, right? Now, what is the Last Supper? Good. So if this is the Last Supper, so he ate the Seder and then he was killed the next day. Would that work for the rabbis? Why? You can't kill him on a holiday. We don't work on a holiday, right? That's our day off. We can't work on that, so that won't work. So what's the Last Supper, right? So what was he doing? So that's interesting because it wouldn't work. So this is what they say he was actually hanged the day before, right? So that's he was hanged the day. So the Last Supper would be the dinner before that. By the way, in temple times, there was such a day, and this is called the Korban Pesach. That's the day of the sacrifice of Passover. You would come to the Temple Mount and you would eat, you would bring meat, barbecue, slaughter it in the temple, barbecue it, and it's considered sacred. You only eat it at that night. Whatever is left over, you have to burn. You can't eat it, and you have to eat it. This is the Yud Gimel, the 13 of Nisan, the night before the Passover Seder. So that's the night. So that would be their Last Supper. And then the next day he would be killed, and that works with the Jewish law. What's very, very cool about this is that Matthew, Luke, and Mark, the 3 synoptic gospel, indeed have Jesus. This is like Da Vinci said, the Last Supper is the Seder, and then he's killed on the next day. Romans kill him, no problem. What's cool is that we have actually 4 gospel and then not 3. And the 4th gospel, which is John, actually has Jesus killed on the eve of Passover and not on Passover itself, which aligns with the rabbis. Now, the reason that John puts him on that date is not because John cares about the Jewish holiday. It's not about that. But John is very consistent in portraying Jesus as being the lamb, the sacrifice. And that works well with him eating the Last Supper and being the sacrifice. And then he is the lamb of Jesus being sacrificed on the eve of Passover. So that works well with John. So John was the first to change the date to be the eve of because of the lamb. The rabbis, when they want to tell about the crucifixion of Jesus, they have 2 traditions, and they choose the one that works for them halachically, legally. But they choose one that they know from the book of John. Look how much they had to know to tell the story. They change it to say that they did it, and they need they need the reason that they do it is different from John. But look how much they know about the Gospels to choose the right date for them. Aren't you happy we did that source? Because we could have gone home without doing that source, and we would have missed that cool thing. Having said that, again, look how it joins forces with what I tried to say, right? Look how much knowledge they needed to know about Christianity. Look how hostile they are. They take responsibility for killing Jesus. And look how much they knew. They knew that no one came for his aid. They knew about this. And so that really works with what we know about this. And lastly, because I mentioned Peter Schaeffer before, Schaeffer says it also mocks Jesus. Because one of the things that proves Jesus was the Messiah is that he predicted his own death. He tells his students, I will be dead in 3 days. I will be, and he says, I'll be back, whatever. So he predicts, and everyone's like, what are you talking about? No one's, and then obviously he's been killed or whatever. Peter Schaeffer says, yeah, you predicted your own death. Yeah, that's very surprising. There's a herald that comes out 40 days before you die. And so everyone knows you're about to die. That's not such a big deal, right? So this is what Peter Schaeffer says. They're mocking even that. I don't know if that's true or not. But this is another way of maybe the rabbis mocking Jesus. Again, so hostility towards Jesus for sure, but the knowledge of what he was doing, not denying the fact that he could do miracles, and testifying to him being part of Jewish milieu because he's being killed by the Sanhedrin and not by the Romans. Again, so don't forget that he was once one of us and under our set of rules. Again, so that plays along with all the stuff that we saw about Jesus in the other sources. And that's it for today. Thank you. They don't have Judas in the Jewish tradition. They do have a very cool passage, which I didn't bring to you, about the students of Jesus. There's one passage that just actually mentions some of these students and like kind of make fun of their names. And it's a good one, but we didn't have time to go into that one. Next time. Thank you so much, everyone.
And with that, we run out of time for you to ask questions. So there you go. Thank you so much. We'll just have to have Professor Barsha Siegel come back to
With
us
food.
and with
Food.
With food. All right, there we go.
No. I actually meant literally food.
Oh,
And no necromancy, please. The crucifixion, I agree. Okay. Okay. Wow. They thought for some reason I was done at 8, so they've been outside for a while. It's cold in here. Why is it cold? It's cold. Yes, I love your boots. I was looking at them the entire time. It's good boots. Marshalls? Good boots. This year?
Oh, no, these are like 6 or 8 years old.
They're very good boots.
They're very.
I'm having